The scene, our world. The time, now. For humankind, problems are always just around the corner, like a branch of cost cutter whose grey shelves are stocked with pain, suffering, misery. So actually, just like a branch of cost cutter, really. Join us as we explore how humanity has rallied our technology and engineering, our sciences and our arts, that's arts, to overcome the great problems. Live from the BBC Problematorium, it's Big Problems with Helen Keen.
Hello, I'm Helen Keen, and joining me to terrify puny humankind with tales of the horrors of our possible destruction, please welcome the voice of doom.
Hello.
We are coming to you live today from the Problematorium rather than the Solutionatorium, because that moved to Salford and it's definitely working out.
The BBC's Problematorium is the place where all BBC problems are stored. If you hear a frenzied knocking, it's just that crate over there marked Jeremy Clarkson.
So, tonight's conundrum, death. Or can we live forever? Now, when I was a kid, I remember people talking about dying, and I'd think, yeah, not me though, won't happen to me. Now, what if it turns out I wasn't just experiencing the self-obsessed, unfailingly naive hopefulness that is characteristic of all children? What if, maybe, somehow, it's possible to live forever? It isn't always easy or polite to discuss death in our society. My dad died when I was still relatively young. He was a postman all his life. A bit of a maverick postman, though, because he did love dogs, never nicked anything. He wasn't a grand figure on the world stage, affecting the lives of hundreds of people or changing the world. But when I was a kid, he bought me stamps that had fallen off, and he helped me collect fossils, and he showed me how to find Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. I wish he could have lived longer. I think most of us will feel that when we inevitably lose those that we love. Right now, we can rarely control when death happens. But what if we could?
It's relatively easy to avoid thinking about death. Most of the time in our society, it tends to be hidden from view. Though for a while, W.H. Smith's stocked a glossy magazine filled with adverts for bespoke caskets with, e.g., pictures of James Bond on them. It was called Farewell Magazine.
So, you know how some people criticise Hello Magazine as being about people who are dead on the inside? Well, this was about people who are dead all the way through.
But does modern mortality have more to offer us than the novelty coffin? When it comes to death, is it finally time to think outside the box? By rights, Farewell Magazine should have been the ultimate bestseller because every single one of us is going to die.
Just take a moment to think about that. Try saying it out loud, maybe. Though not if you're listening to this on an aeroplane. The idea of bringing the dead back to life, meddling scientifically with the end, has terrified us, at least since Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. As our ageing bodies fail us, could perhaps technology allow us to upload our minds to some vast data cloud centre, joining together in one great electronic computer all-consciousness, like on Twitter, you know, when everyone live tweets the final of the Eurovision Song Contest? Well, hashtag even better than that.
Or do recent medical breakthroughs mean we are now, today, living in the era of the first 1,000-year-old human? Is this even desirable? Is living forever actually a fate worse than death? As novelist Susan Erst observed,
millions long for immortality who don't know what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday afternoon.
We all know you get to about 30 and everything starts, well, rotting. But inside our heads, we don't age in the same way. We can still feel as young at 60 as we did at 16. Could this youthfulness one day be physical as well as mental? Well, maybe. Some of the most positive and popularly publicised research into extending life has involved mice. In an experiment in the 1980s, a group of mice on a calorie-restricted diet remained youthful and lived for around 50% longer. It's hard to know, though, exactly what the implications of this are for us humans.
I miss cheese.
Or maybe it's not.
Mankind has always aspired to long life, but in ancient times, immortality was possessed only by the gods.
In Greek mythology, the mortal Tithonus was granted eternal life, but alas, forgot to ask for eternal youth. Throughout history, his tortured cry rings out.
Nice to see you. to see you, nice.
So this leads us to the 5 main options for overcoming or reconfiguring death.
Overcoming death. Option 1. Hoping for an afterlife.
Until relatively recently, the socially acceptable piety was that death wasn't it.
As one chapter closes, a new one begins. Different, maybe. Even not quite as enjoyable, but nevertheless a continuation, an elaboration of what has gone before. Like The Apprentice, You're Fired. Or Strictly Come Dancing, It Takes Two, only hosted by God instead of Zoe Ball.
What many spiritual people believe is that at least a part of human beings do go on forever. This part is usually referred to as the soul. No religions believe, e.g., that the knees are immortal.
And though he leaves us, we take comfort in the knowledge that Darren's knees will enjoy the life everlasting.
Now, I grew up in a religious family who believe very firmly in Judgment Day, in the full bodily resurrection Christian sense, rather than the movie franchise Terminator sense. My mum doesn't even believe in cremation because she says she simply can't shake that feeling that come the final trump, God's just going to turn up and say,
Oh, I can't work with this. Oh. You know, I did say...
Scientific attempts to define the soul have always been problematic. In 1901, American doctor Duncan McDougall decided to see if he could prove that the soul left the body at the point of death by weighing people as they died.
There were no highly accurate electronic scales at the time, so he wheeled his dying volunteers onto a huge balance scale designed for weighing silk, ordering them to keep still as they died, as any movement would make the weight harder to measure.
Some considered that he was presiding over a scientifically dubious, unethical experiment, insistently prompting vulnerable people onto a massive set of scales.
See also Weight Watchers.
McDougall believed he had possibly detected the human soul leaving the body. There was a sudden weight loss at the moment of death, around 21 grams, which, sticking with the Weight Watchers system, makes the soul worth up to 11 points. When it comes to the question of how long we can enjoy life for in the here and now, we all have different ideas about what constitutes a good innings.
My days are in the yellow leaf. The flowers and fruits of love are gone. The worm, the canker, and the grief are mine alone. Lord Byron, on this day I complete my 36th year.
But getting old, properly old, as in the hills and sin and Hotmail, kills an estimated 100,000 people every single day. Well, there is encouraging news. Age researcher Aubrey de Grey says,
The first person to live to be 1,000 years old is certainly today alive, whether they realise it or not. Barring accidents and suicide, most people now, 40 years or younger, can expect to live for centuries.
Which is brilliant! Though, you know, bad luck, Mum and Dad.
De Grey's Methuselah Foundation, named after Methuselah, the Old Testament king who lived for 969 years, as opposed to the 6-litre wine bottle, which is probably not the best aid to living a long time, offers an annual prize for scientists who can exhibit the longest-lived mouse or demonstrate the most successful late-onset rejuvenation of a mouse.
It's always mice, isn't it? I'm sensing a future for humankind full of surprising appearances by mice you thought were long gone. So in that respect, not unlike my kitchen.
Extending whole lives into centuries and beyond is a radical shift, but extending the life of individual body parts when they wear out is taken for granted. For instance, hundreds of thousands of people have their hip joints replaced every year.
In 1891, the brilliantly monikered Professor Themistocles Gluck performed the very first hip replacement using ivory, which was way cool until he fell victim to poachers. This leads us to
Overcoming death, option 2. Replacement parts.
Medical research into human regeneration is certainly a hot topic right now.
Could medical replacement breakthroughs let you carry on feeling young for a couple of 100 years longer? Or will it go all Frankenstein on your ass? Or rather, will it go all Frankenstein on somebody else's ass that has been stitched on to replace your dowdy, outmoded 21st century ass?
The problem here is that there's usually no consistency in our collective attitudes to reconditioned bits of other people helping us out. We're okay-ish now with internal organ transplants, but as soon as you start sewing external bits of one person onto another person, at best, you're Victor Frankenstein. At worst, you're probably working up to making a human centipede.
So, we're happy with heart transplants. But when the first penis transplant occurred in China in 2006, it was a different story. It had to be reversed after 14 days as, for some reason, both the man and his partner experienced simultaneous, overwhelming feelings of psychological rejection towards the creepy, weird, unheimlich Frankenpenis.
So what would be really great is if we could get over this with our own bodies repairing themselves. If the body could be persuaded to fix itself as it aged, to regenerate bit by bit as necessary.
Overcoming death, option 3. Growing your own. This isn't unheard of in nature. There are flatworms that can regrow their whole heads, and salamanders that can regenerate entire limbs.
It seems even humans can regrow their fingertips, eventually, which is a bit of a rubbish superpower, to be honest.
Behold, I am the regenerator. You cannot harm me with your puny car doors. Trap my fingertips in them, if you will.
Oh, God! Oh, that hurts! Oh! Only a while longer.
3 to 6 months later.
There! Behold, I have regenerated.
But for the moment, at least, we need help to grow our replacement parts.
Chinese scientists believe they've found a way to grow new teeth in mice, obviously. Using urine, less obviously.
So they use the wee to obtain stem cells. These are the master cells in our bodies that can grow into any type of tissue. And then the stem cells develop into tiny new teeth. Sadly, I read a critique of this study by a British researcher who said patients' urine was, quote, not immediately going to lead to new options for the dentist, because wee was one of the, quote, worst sources for stem cells, although apparently it's still better than Tabasco. Sources. Yeah. But if contemporary medicine can't cut it right now, can we hang on until it does?
Overcoming death, option 4. Having a bit of a kip and hoping things will be better by the time you wake up.
Cryogenics, freezing your body in the hope that medical science will eventually be able to fix it, was once hailed as the future of death. But it has never really caught on. Since 1967, only about 250 people have been cryogenically frozen. That's including 9 who were suspiciously defrosted when funds ran low. So yeah, it's not something you want to risk doing on a budget. You wouldn't want to do it on a Groupon.
But there may be other ways of preserving human life by suspending animation. Nature has its own version of this, hibernation. Hibernation is still not well understood in large creatures like bears, but seems to be a sort of self-induced coma where, as the seasons change and the temperature drops, most non-essential bodily functions like digestion switch off.
So, the answer to the all-important question, do bears defecate in the woods, is no, not during the 5 to 7 months when they are hibernating. However, His Holiness doesn't sleep through the winter, so the Pope is still a Catholic.
Recent research on smaller animals revealed that mice, creatures who, like humans, don't usually hibernate, can be induced to do so when they're exposed to small quantities of hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is the stink gas that makes flatulence smell of rotten eggs.
Which might explain a lot.
When Bagpuss goes to sleep, all his friends, oh,
go to sleep too. The mice on the mouse organ.
Yes. So the scientific hunt for immortality continues. We've had fictional immortals who don't age for ages, and through them we've explored some of the difficulties that come with the whole not dying deal. Usually when a deathless protagonist begins a relationship with a mere mortal.
Who could forget the moving death of the hero's wife in epic 80s film Highlander, about the great immortal warrior Connor MacLeod from Scotland, which is, incidentally, the country with the lowest life expectancy in Western Europe. So Connor is what we call a statistical outlier. But maybe when immortality eventually arrives, it will be because technologies have advanced so dramatically that the human form has fundamentally changed. Welcome to Overcoming Death, Option 5, the tinfoily future world of transhumanism.
Transhumanists essentially hope and believe that we will become immortal by somehow merging with technology.
Immediately, this makes most people think of the chilling man-machine monsters of science fiction like the Cybermen and Inspector Gadget.
Or the development of machines that are so intelligent that they become self-aware and attempt to enslave/annihilate the whole of the human race.
See also Battlestar Galactica's Cylons, the Terminator, Herbie Goes Bananas. But will computers take over the world? And if so, can we get a Google alert for that?
Does this idea of self-aware machines even make sense, though? And why is the first thing that these self-conscious machines think always,
Exterminate the humans!
rather than,
Don't look at me, I am so embarrassed.
in theory, an intelligent self-aware machine could carry on working forever, or at least until it was turned off at the mains. But could the human brain really link with a computer to gain immortality? And how can we tell if a computer is self-aware anyway? British genius mathematician and computer scientist Alan Turing famously said that we have a polite convention. If the person we're having a conversation with appears sentient, we just tend to assume they are. It's not nice or British to inquire any further. This assumption has resulted in the Turing test, a test for computer intelligence where a human being tries to distinguish a machine from another human by asking them both the same questions. Now, we are going to run our own version of that right now.
We think of a sense of humor as being something uniquely human. But now we're going to test whether our studio audience can tell the difference between man and machine or woman and womachine.
Researchers at Edinburgh University have developed a computer program that generates jokes in a very specific format. So I like my X like I like my Y. So for example, that would be something like, I like my women like I like my socks. Odd. Before the show, we asked our audience to come up with their own versions of these. And now we're going to read some of the audience jokes and some generated by Edinburgh University's computer program.
And we'll see if you can guess who wrote what. Mighty machine or puny human? Processor or punmeister? Let the games begin.
I like my coffee like I like my war. Cold.
Computer or human? Computer, yes. And how sinister.
I like my books like I like my women. Short.
Human, computer. Oh, computer, no, it was human. Jonathan, in the audience, you have failed the Turing test.
I like my women like I like my gas. Natural.
Human or computer? Computer, yeah, oh, you're getting good at this. Yes, computer, that's right.
I like my radio shows like I like my girlfriends. Downloadable.
I don't know, what do we think? Yes, that was Duncan, audience member, with a message for BBC commissioning there as well. That concludes the experiment. Thank you for your time. Today, the most famous transhumanist and predictor of thinking machines is Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil is the director of engineering at Google. His job is basically to teach the Google search engine to understand human language. But he also invented the flatbed scanner, the first print-to-speech reading machine for the blind, the first commercial text-to-speech synthesizer, and claims to have predicted the fall of the Soviet Union caused by, amongst other things, fax machines. He also, FYI, according to an interview I read, owns a collection of over 300 cat figurines. But Kurzweil's vision is of a brave new world where
Information will infuse all creation because everything is overlaid with virtual reality. Everything will speak, basically like magic. And nanobots, tiny robots small enough to be injected into the human body, will replace blood cells and organs so we can halt, then reverse aging. We'll use brain ports to extend and upload our minds, ourselves. Mind my porcelain Garfield. Our immortality will be a matter of being sufficiently careful to make frequent backups. If we're careless about this, we'll have to load an old backup copy and be doomed to repeat our recent past.
when someone asked him, does God exist? Kurzweil's reply was
I'd say not yet.
confident. Some transhumanists, Ray Kurzweil included, believe that there's a time coming when everything will change for us and artificial intelligence. They call this
The singularity.
the singularity. Is the point at which rapid progress in science and technology becomes bewildering and beyond human comprehension. So it may have arrived the other night when I tried to Sky Plus Game of Thrones from my laptop.
Why would this happen? Because technology is speeding up. Computers are increasing exponentially in complexity, doubling the transistors per integrated circuit every 2 years.
The idea is that if they continue at this rate, there will come a point, the singularity, when there'll be an intelligence explosion that massively surpasses the abilities of any human to understand. Because Gordon Moore, one of the founders of the company Intel, spotted it, this exponential increase is known as Moore's Law, which also sounds like a great pitch for a detective series.
The name's Moore. How it all started? It was a transistor. Transistor to make a nerd kick a hole in an R2-D2 figurine that was still in its original box.
For transhumanists, in the wake of the singularity, man will have a choice. Either he will choose to remain in an unenhanced, inferior state, or he will transform. He will join with machine to become a godlike uber being, his intellect dwarfing mere human understanding, the post-human. And one thing I can't help noticing is that, as an idea, it's particularly popular with a certain sort of man, and it always seems to be a man who probably already spends quite a lot of his time with a computer. I sympathise a lot with them, but whenever I read about a transhumanist saying,
From one point of view, the scientist would emerge as a new species and leave humanity behind.
or
Humans should not stand in the way of a higher form of evolution. These machines are godlike. It is human destiny to create them.
I can't help mentally adding the words,
The bullies won't take my school bag away from me then. Oh no. Not when I've got giant bionic robot laser claws.
some people say that transhumanists are going too far and playing God, at least when they're not playing World of Warcraft.
And what if we could choose not to become post-humans, to remain unenhanced? Transhumanists say advanced artificial intelligence would appear godlike to us, just as we appear godlike to a mouse or cockroach.
Do we appear godlike to a mouse, though? Because I'm not a particularly God-fearing person, but I don't think I would run around extensively pooing in a deity's bread bin. And really, mice don't understand us enough to appreciate our relative superintelligence. As far as I'm aware, mice have yet to discover their own John Connor leading the resistance.
Come with me if you want to live, and also go to the toilet on an egg box!
But however silly or far-fetched some of these ideas seem to us today, at quiet moments, in the middle of the night, we come back to the same age-old questions. If there isn't anything more to our lives than, well, our lives, then how do we make sense of them?
As the poet Yeats asked, is man really nothing more than a tattered coat upon a stick? If nothing else, that would be a really poor London Fashion Week.
And the transhumanists? Well, personally, I'd love to be nimbly skipping across the ravaged post-apocalyptic landscape with my bionic legs, bending the unenhanced to my will and making copies of my great mind to sell on floppy disk. A major criticism of transhumanism is that it's just for a very tiny group of rich people who want to buy the ultimate product, eternal life. And some in the scientific mainstream may sneer at transhumanists. It can be easy to mock them. And yet, when you read interviews with transhumanist Ray Kurzweil, beneath all the talk of nanobots and circuitry and superbrains, there's a wistfulness. that comes from a very different place to the shiny talk of sci-fi uber beings.
As a young boy, Kurzweil already had all kinds of futuristic plans. His father worked all the hours he could to support the young Ray's outlandish dreams as the boy experimented and invented. Kurzweil Sr. didn't have great health and eventually wore himself out and died when he was in his 50s, well before Ray's career really took off. One of Kurzweil's ambitions is to bring his father back to life, or rather, some computerized essence of his father back to life, partly to astound the world, but partly also to show his dad it was all worthwhile, to see his happiness, that the sacrifices were worth it.
After my dad died, the thing I kept thinking about and remembering was how he loved to stand outside the jeweller's shop just looking at watches. His dad used to fix old clocks as a hobby, so he had a fascination with them and their mechanisms. And even though he never mentioned it, I knew my dad would love to own something grander than a cheap digital watch. And though I never mentioned it, I always planned to buy him one once I'd grown up and made it. But of course, that never happened.
Death will never truly make sense to us as human beings. How can we remember people so clearly, yet only ever see them in our mind's eye or our dreams, and never again in reality? How can we imagine our own deaths?
Whether you're hoping for heaven or the singularity or just a bit of peace and quiet, finally, whatever comes next is going to be uncertain, because to not exist, that's unimaginable. Mary Wollstonecraft, the 18th century writer and philosopher, said this:
"It appears to me impossible that I should cease to exist, or that this active, restless spirit, equally alive to joy and sorrow, should only be organized dust, ready to fly abroad the moment the spring snaps or the spark goes out, which kept it together."
She would later die giving birth to her second daughter, the novelist Mary Shelley, creator of proto-transhumanist Victor Frankenstein. So, she died giving birth to the person who gave birth to the idea of scientific resurrection.
Surely something resides in this heart that is not perishable, and life is more than a dream.
Am I waking up from a long sleep? The last thing I remember is a very funny smell.
Big Problems with Helen Keen was written by Helen Keen and Miriam Underhill. It was performed by Helen Keen, Peter Serafinowicz and Susy Kane. The producer was Gareth Edwards. It was a BBC Radio comedy production.